Havana. The sea hums softly against the Malecon. In the distance, a tall, aging man leans on a balcony, eyes half closed, the evening wind brushing through his grey beard. Beneath the twilight sky, the city breathes his name. Fidel. He was born on a sugar plantation, far from the marble halls of power. Yet, from that soil of poverty and pride, something unbreakable began to grow. An idea, a dream, and a defiance that would shake the 20th century. To some, he was a savior. To others, a tyrant. But to history, he became a paradox. The revolutionary who both freed and ruled with iron conviction. Fidel Castro once said, "A revolution is not a bed of roses. A revolution is a struggle between the future and the past." His life was that struggle. Not just against empires or enemies, but against time, fear, and the weight of his own ideals. Behind the fiery speeches and the endless cigar smoke lived a man, restless, brilliant, haunted. Tonight, we journey through the life of that man, not to judge, but to understand. The boy from Birán, the student who dreamed of justice, the leader who defied the world, and the legend who still flickers in the memory of history. This is Fidel Castro, the dream that defied the world. And if you wish to walk further into stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and let history whisper again. Chapter 1. The Boy from Birán. The story begins in Birán, a small, humid village tucked deep within the green heart of eastern Cuba. The air smelled of sugarcane and soil, and the nights hummed with the sound of crickets. It was here, on August 13th, 1926, that Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz was born, a child of contradictions, just like the land around him. His father, Ángel Castro, had come from Spain as a poor soldier and stayed to build a fortune in sugar. He was strong, disciplined, and distant, a man who believed in work more than words. His mother, Lena Ruz, was gentle, religious, and endlessly patient. From her, Fidel inherited tenderness. From his father, an unbreakable will. The Castro estate was not rich in elegance, but it was rich in labor. Dozens of workers cut cane under the burning sun. As a boy, Fidel played among their children, barefoot and curious. He saw hunger in their faces, and questions began to grow inside him. Quiet at first, then restless. Why must some live in shadow while others live in light? At school, his intelligence quickly stood out. The Jesuit priests who taught him at Santiago and later at El Colegio de Belén in Havana recognized a mind both brilliant and defiant. He was drawn to history, Bolivar, Martí, Napoleon, men who had turned nations with words and courage. Yet beneath admiration lay something deeper. A need to prove himself worthy of such legends. He loved debates, arguments that stretched long into the night. His teachers found him stubborn, his classmates magnetic. Fidel never accepted easy answers. He questioned, challenged, demanded logic from authority. Even then, leadership seemed to cling to him. Not because he sought it, but because conviction has gravity. But it wasn't all seriousness. He laughed loudly, competed fiercely in baseball, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who already sensed his own path. Still, there were moments. Late at night, alone by the dormitory window, when he felt something vast and unspoken stir inside him. He would gaze beyond the city lights, wondering if destiny, like history, could be rewritten.
When he returned home to Birán during breaks, the contrast struck him harder each time. His family lived comfortably, but the workers' children still walked barefoot. The sugarcane fields no longer looked like a playground. They looked like chains. The boy who once asked innocent questions now began to see patterns of injustice. Years later, he would recall, injustice was everywhere. It was impossible not to see it. He began reading voraciously, philosophy, politics, the speeches of José Martí, the poetry of Neruda, the writings of Marx. Ideas became his rebellion. He was not yet a revolutionary, but the outline of one was forming quietly beneath his skin. Those who knew him then remember his intensity, eyes that seemed to look through you, words that carried weight even in youth. One teacher once said, "When Fidel believed something, you could not move him with a tank." In those early years, the world was still simple. Heroes and tyrants, justice and injustice, power and poverty. But to Fidel, even then, simplicity was only the surface. He sensed that true change would demand more than anger. It would require sacrifice. Looking back, he would describe his childhood not with nostalgia, but with reflection. I was born in a family that had everything and nothing. Everything that money could buy. Nothing that justice could give. And so, in the still heat of Birán, among cane fields and contradictions, a restless boy began to dream, not of wealth nor fame, but of a revolution that would one day bear his name. Chapter 2: The Student and the Fire. Havana in the 1940s was a city of contradictions, beauty and decay, music and hunger, laughter and corruption. Beneath the shimmer of nightclubs and American cars, young Fidel walked its streets with eyes wide open. He was now a law student at the University of Havana, a world away from the cane fields of Birán, yet closer than ever to the questions that haunted him. The university was alive with tension. Ideas clashed in every hallway: nationalism, socialism, fascism, imperialism. Students shouted from balconies, banners waved, fists rose in protest. Havana was not only learning, it was burning. Fidel arrived shy at first, but that shyness vanished quickly. He listened, then argued, then led. His speeches, passionate, precise, and full of conviction, drew crowds. Even those who disagreed couldn't look away. One classmate remembered, "When Fidel spoke, you didn't just hear him, you felt him." He soon found himself drawn into student politics, a fierce and dangerous world. Gangs controlled parts of the campus. Political violence simmered everywhere. Assassinations were common. But Fidel walked straight into the fire. He believed courage was the only way to live honestly. He ran for leadership positions, joined debates,
and began writing against corruption and US influence in Cuba. The island, though technically free, was bound by invisible strings. Foreign companies owned its sugar, its railroads, even its dreams. To Fidel, it was slavery, under a modern name. "Men do not beg for freedom," he once said. "Men fight for it." But behind the fiery speeches, there was still the thinker, the quiet boy who pondered at windows. His friends recalled how he spent long hours in the library reading Martí and Rousseau, analyzing revolutions of the past. He was fascinated by how ideas could outlive bullets, how courage could bend empires.
He traveled across Latin America for student congresses: Bogota, Caracas, Panama. He saw poverty mirrored everywhere, and the anger that came with it. The dream of liberation was not just Cuban. It was continental. It was human. During a trip to Bogota in 1948, a violent uprising known as El Bogotazo erupted. The city burned. Fidel found himself amid chaos: gunfire, smoke, blood. He later said, "That day I saw what the people can do when pushed beyond despair." Something inside him shifted. The fire that had once been curiosity became purpose. When he returned to Havana, the world felt smaller, his mission clearer. Law, he realized, was only a tool. Justice was the goal. And in a system built on inequality, justice could never simply be given. It had to be taken. He began to live like a man already chosen by history. Friends noticed how focused he had become, how his laughter had grown rarer, replaced by long silences. He no longer sought comfort, only cause. His professors saw brilliance but warned of danger. "You are too intense," one told him. "You will burn yourself before you change the world." Fidel smiled. "Then at least the fire will be seen," he replied. By the time he graduated, the student from Birán had transformed into something larger. A symbol of restless youth. A voice that refused silence. He didn't yet have an army, or a plan, or even a mountain to fight from. But the flame was already there, waiting for the wind. And Havana, with all its noise, its corruption, its dreams, had given him exactly that. Chapter 3: The Failed Storm. The year was 1953. Cuba was restless. In the bars of Havana, whispers grew louder. Whispers about corruption, hunger, and the man who had stolen the Republic's soul. His name was Fulgencio Batista, a former sergeant turned dictator, backed by money and blessed by Washington. To the poor, he was a shadow that never left the island. To Fidel, he was a wound that had to be healed. Fidel had tried the path of words. He defended peasants in court, wrote essays, delivered speeches. But corruption devoured everything it touched. The courts bowed to power, politicians bowed to fear, and justice bowed to greed. The young lawyer began to realize that the system was not broken. It was built that way. And so, he decided to do something that most men only dreamed about: to start a revolution. The plan was desperate.
yet meticulously drawn.
On July 26, 1953, Fidel and 160 followers, mostly students, teachers, farmers, launched a surprise attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. It was the second largest military fortress in the country, guarded by hundreds of soldiers. But Fidel believed that courage could outmatch numbers, that faith could overcome fear. Their goal was not conquest, but inspiration. The assault was meant to spark the people, to awaken a nation that had been sleeping under the weight of oppression. A revolution is not made by chance, he told his comrades. It is made by men who cannot bear to live without freedom. At dawn, they drove toward the fortress in a line of old cars, disguised in stolen uniforms. The sky was pale blue, the air trembling with tension. But fate is a ruthless editor. A few cars got lost, confusion spread, and within minutes the plan unraveled. The first shots shattered the morning. Machine guns roared from the fortress walls. Bullets tore through the air. Fidel's dream met its first trial in blood. Some of his men fought back desperately. Others were cut down before firing a shot. It was chaos. Brief, brutal, unforgettable. By noon, it was over. The revolution that was supposed to awaken Cuba had been crushed before it began. Dozens of rebels were killed, many captured, tortured, and executed without trial. But Fidel escaped, slipping into the wild hills outside Santiago with a few survivors. For days they hid in the forest, hungry, wounded, uncertain of everything but one thing: that their cause had not died. When the army finally caught him, Fidel did not resist. He stood tall, calm, and spoke with the quiet fire of conviction. At his trial, he turned his defense into a prophecy. "Condemn me, it does not matter. History will absolve me." Those words would become a banner for generations.
In prison, he was not silenced. He read endlessly, wrote letters, educated his fellow inmates, and refined his vision of what Cuba could be. He believed that failure was not an ending, but an apprenticeship. Defeat, he wrote to a friend, is only the first chapter of victory. For nearly 2 years, he remained behind bars on the Isle of Pines. Yet the legend of the Moncada attack grew. Outside, people whispered his name, knowing not as a criminal, but as a man who dared to challenge power. The revolution had failed militarily, but morally, it had begun to win. When Batista, pressured by public opinion, finally released the prisoners in 1955, Fidel emerged lean, calm, and unbroken. He told the waiting journalists simply, "Now, we begin again." Within months, he would leave for Mexico to gather his brother Raul, a young doctor named Che Guevara, and a small band of dreamers who would one day sail back to Cuba on a fragile boat called Granma. The failed storm of Moncada had not ended the dream. It had baptized it in blood. Years later, Fidel would reflect softly, "We lost the battle, but we began the war." And in that quiet July dawn, amid smoke and fear, the first spark of revolution flickered to life, a flame that would soon engulf an empire. Chapter 4.
The Exile and the Return. Mexico City, 1955. The air was dry, the nights long, and the exiles restless. In a small apartment on Birán Street, Fidel Castro began again, rebuilding his revolution from the ashes of Moncada. He was thinner now, his face older, his eyes sharper. He spoke little, worked constantly, and carried the silence of someone who had seen death and learned to bargain with it. Around him gathered a band of believers, students, farmers, soldiers without uniforms, all united by a single dream: to return home and free Cuba. Among them was his brother Raúl, quieter but fierce in loyalty, and a young Argentine doctor named Ernesto Che Guevara, thoughtful, disciplined, and equally obsessed with justice. Their meeting would change the course of Latin American history. In smoky rooms and late-night discussions, Fidel mapped out what would become the next chapter of his struggle. He taught strategy, spoke of sacrifice, and repeated one mantra again and again: patience, discipline, faith. Che would later write in his diary, "Fidel had an extraordinary faith in victory, even when it seemed impossible." He spoke not like a man planning a war, but like a man describing destiny. They trained secretly in the countryside outside Mexico City, learning to shoot, to march, to survive. Their weapons were few, their funds smaller still. But the real weapon, Fidel reminded them, was conviction. "If we stand together," he said, "a handful of men can shake the world." The plan was simple in words, but impossible in practice: to sail back to Cuba and begin a guerrilla war against Batista's regime. The journey would be made on an old, fragile yacht called Granma, designed for 12 people but carrying 82. On the morning of November 25th, 1956, under a cloudy Mexican sky, they set sail. Waves crashed against the sides, seasickness swept the deck, and salt burned their eyes. For 7 long days they drifted, lost, hungry, exhausted. But their hearts were anchored to Cuba. When they finally reached the southern coast near Las Coloradas, they were already behind schedule. Batista's soldiers were waiting. The landing was a disaster. Ambushed in the mangroves, the rebels were scattered and slaughtered. Only a handful survived. Fidel, Raúl, Che, and about a dozen others. They crawled through swamps and forests, starving, barefoot, hunted. Every night, Fidel whispered to his men, "If we still have 10, we will win." They reached the Sierra Maestra mountains, wild, remote, and ancient. There, hidden among the trees, the revolution began again. In the early months, they were ghosts. The army thought them dead. But the peasants of the mountains began to see them, ragged, tired, yet unbroken. And slowly, word spread. The bearded ones are alive. Fidel's leadership was calm, methodical, and deeply human. He shared food equally, punished theft, and treated even captured soldiers with dignity. He knew that revolutions were not only fought with guns, they were won through example. Journalists from abroad soon found their way to the Sierra. One of them, Herbert Matthews from the New York Times, interviewed Fidel in 1957. The article shocked the world. Fidel Castro, it read, is alive, and he is fighting. Batista's regime, which had declared him dead, suddenly looked weak and afraid. From that moment, the tide began to turn. The exiled lawyer from Birán had returned, not as a prisoner or a fugitive, but as a commander of men and a symbol of hope. He told his followers, "We started from nothing, and we will return with everything, because an idea cannot be killed." By the end of that year, the once small group had grown into a movement. The 26th of July had become more than a date. It was a promise. And as the mist rolled over the Sierra, the sound of distant drums began to echo again. The heartbeat of a revolution, reborn from exile. Chapter 5. The Guerrilla in the Mountains. The Sierra Maestra was a world apart, an island within an island. Thick forests cloaked the mountains like ancient guardians, and mist rolled through the valleys like whispers of forgotten gods. It was here, in this rugged heart of Cuba, that Fidel Castro rebuilt his revolution from a handful of survivors into a living legend. The first months were brutal. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, mosquitoes tormented their nights, and the sound of distant gunfire reminded them that Batista's army was never far. Yet, amid the hardship, something profound took root. A sense of purpose, of belonging, of destiny. Fidel moved among his men like one of them, eating the same food, sleeping on the same ground. He shared every danger, every exhaustion. But even in the darkest hours, he carried a presence that steadied the others. Che Guevara once described it. He was a man who could make you believe in the impossible, because he already did. Each morning began before dawn. The men cleaned their weapons, studied maps, and prepared for ambushes. Fidel, ever the teacher, lectured between battles, not just about tactics, but about ethics. "We are not fighting to destroy," he told them. "We are fighting to restore dignity." To the peasants who risked everything to feed them, he offered kindness and justice instead of fear. Slowly, the mountains became more than a hiding place. They became a homeland of resistance. The guerrillas began to organize. They created schools, field hospitals, and a code of conduct. Theft and cruelty were punished. Compassion rewarded. Discipline, Fidel said, is the soul of victory. And discipline became their armor. The enemy's strength was vast, but its spirit was hollow. Batista's soldiers, poorly motivated and brutalized, often surrendered rather than fight. Each skirmish taught the rebels more about the terrain, more about themselves. Victories, however small, began to ripple across the island. Rumors spread through villages and cities. Los Barbudos, the bearded ones, were winning. The outside world began to take notice. Foreign reporters trekked into the mountains, drawn by the myth forming around Fidel's name. Photographs showed a man in fatigues, his beard thick, his gaze calm and unwavering. To the oppressed across Latin America, he became a symbol of defiance. To Batista, a nightmare that refused to die. As months passed, the Sierra transformed into a living camp of revolution. Radios crackled with messages from sympathizers. New recruits climbed the trails carrying rifles or nothing at all. Che set up clinics. Raul trained recruits, and Fidel planned, always planned. He divided the army into columns, each responsible for a region. Guerrilla warfare was an art of patience, he taught. We will move like shadows, he said, strike like lightning, and vanish like smoke. Every ambush, every skirmish was as much psychological as military. Batista's troops could never catch what they could not see, but behind the triumphs lay an immense emotional toll. Many of Fidel's comrades fell, shot in ambushes, captured, or lost to disease. Each death weighed heavily on him. At night, by the campfire, he sometimes sat alone, staring into the flames. Revolution, he murmured once, is born in pain. But pain can be holy if it leads to freedom. By 1958, the movement had grown from a dream into an army. They controlled large parts of Oriente province and had become a political force Batista could no longer ignore. Planes bombed the mountains, villages were burned, but instead of breaking, the guerrillas grew stronger. Every bomb that fell only deepened the people's hatred of the regime. In a small clearing one evening, Fidel addressed his men. His voice was low but steady. If we die, others will take our place. If they kill us, Cuba will rise from our graves. Remember this. Victory is not a miracle. It is a consequence. That night, as the firelight flickered against the leaves and the crickets sang, the revolution's heartbeat throbbed, steady and strong. The men slept with their rifles beside them, dreaming not of war, but of a dawn when their children would wake to a free island. High above, the stars burned, cold and clear. Below them, in the dense Cuban jungle, a band of bearded dreamers kept moving, step by step, breath by breath, turning a mountain into a movement, and a movement into the future. Chapter 6. The Triumph of 1959. By the end of 1958, the Sierra Maestra had become the beating heart of a new Cuba. What began as a whisper of rebellion had swelled into a roar that echoed from the mountains to the cities. Fidel Castro, once a fugitive lawyer with a broken cause, was now the commander of a growing army, disciplined, determined, and driven by an unshakable belief that history was finally bending in their favor. The tide had turned. The Batistas regime, bloated with corruption and violence, was crumbling under its own weight. Soldiers deserted in droves, and the people, once silenced by fear, began to defy their rulers in small but dangerous ways. Farmers hid food for the rebels, students printed underground newspapers, and mothers whispered Fidel's name as a promise to their children. One day, we will be free. In the mountains, Fidel gathered his commanders for what he called the final push. The plan was audacious, a coordinated series of offensives that would cut the country in half and corner Batista in Havana. He spoke to his men beneath a starlit sky, his voice steady and full of quiet conviction. "We are not fighting for revenge," he said, "but for redemption. Let every bullet we fire carry the weight of justice, not hate." Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos led two key columns westward, advancing through the countryside like a rising tide. Town after town fell to the rebels, not just by force, but by persuasion. Fidel's strategy was not merely military. It was psychological. He sent messages to enemy soldiers offering amnesty if they surrendered, and dignity if they switched sides. Many did. The revolution, Che wrote in his journal, was not only fought with rifles, it was fought with words. As December came, Batista's grip on Cuba slipped into panic. His speeches grew desperate, his generals mistrustful, his people defiant. The rebels had captured Santa Clara, a crucial city in the center of the island, after a stunning battle led by Che. Trains carrying government troops and weapons were derailed. Entire battalions surrendered, and the people poured into the streets shouting, "Viva la Revolución!" In Havana, the regime's mask finally broke. On the night of December 31st, 1958, as fireworks for the new year echoed in the distance, Fulgencio Batista fled the island, boarding a plane with his family and fortune, leaving behind a country that no longer belonged to him. When dawn came on January 1st, 1959, Cuba woke to silence. The kind of silence that follows an earthquake. The old world had ended. News raced through the island like wildfire. Batista is gone. Bells rang. People wept. Strangers embraced in the streets. In the Sierra, Fidel received the news with a long breath. He said simply, "The tyrant has fled." Now, the true struggle begins. The columns began their triumphant march toward Havana. Thousands lined the roads. Farmers, children, workers, throwing flowers and shouting his name. Trucks rolled through dusty villages, and men in olive green uniforms waved from the back, their beards and smiles alike radiant with disbelief. When Fidel entered Havana a week later, the city erupted in a fever of joy. It was as though the entire nation had exhaled at once, after years of suffocation. He stood atop a tank, waving to the crowds that seemed to stretch to the horizon. The sound of 1,000,000 voices filled the air, chanting, crying, singing. That night, standing before the people for the first time as the victor, Fidel spoke not as a conqueror, but as a storyteller who knew the ending had not yet been written. "This victory," he said, "is not mine. It belongs to those who died, to those who dreamed, to those who never stopped believing. The revolution is not over. It has only begun." Fireworks lit the sky above the capital. For a moment, the world seemed reborn. Children danced in the streets. Elderly men, long silent, saluted the flag with trembling hands. Hope, real, tangible, electric, surged through every heart. Yet even as cheers filled Havana's night, Fidel's eyes were distant. He knew revolutions were easy to win and hard to keep. Power, like freedom, could be lost if one forgot its purpose. "History," he once told a journalist, "will absolve me." But history, he also knew, was still watching. The dawn of January 2nd broke soft and golden over the Caribbean. The bearded rebels, now heroes, stood atop tanks and balconies, their silhouettes cut against the rising sun. A new Cuba had arrived. Uncertain, untested, but alive. And as the people sang beneath their flag for the first time in years, Fidel whispered to those beside him, almost as if to himself, "We are home at last." Chapter 7. The Shadow of the Cold War. The revolution had triumphed, but peace, Fidel soon learned, was far more complicated than war. Havana in 1959 was a city reborn. The streets pulsed with music and laughter. Banners of the 26th of July movement fluttered from balconies, and people spoke of justice as if it were a living thing finally freed from its chains. Yet beneath the joy lay a quiet unease, the question of what comes next. Fidel stood at the edge of history, adored by the people but watched carefully by the world. The United States, once cautiously optimistic, soon grew suspicious. American newspapers painted him as a dangerous radical. Politicians whispered that Cuba might fall to communism. Fidel insisted that his revolution was not red, but human. "We are not communists," he told the crowd. "We are revolutionaries. We fight for dignity." But dignity, in the language of global politics, was a dangerous word. When he nationalized foreign-owned businesses and redistributed land to peasants, Washington responded with anger. Trade was restricted, aid withdrawn, and the once open channels of diplomacy began to freeze. Fidel, ever defiant, turned his gaze toward the only power willing to listen, the Soviet Union. In 1960, he met with Soviet representatives in Havana. The meeting was cautious but warm. Moscow offered oil, credit, and protection. In return, Fidel offered friendship and, increasingly, alignment. The island that had been America's backyard was now drifting into the orbit of its greatest rival. The world took notice. What had begun as a revolution of farmers and dreamers was now becoming a piece on the grand chessboard of the Cold War. By 1961, tensions had reached a breaking point. The United States severed diplomatic ties and began to plot his removal. On April 17, 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion unfolded. A secret CIA-backed assault by Cuban exiles hoping to overthrow the new government. It failed, disastrously. Fidel, wearing his olive green uniform and carrying his rifle, stood before the captured invaders and declared, "This is the revolution of the humble, by the humble, and for the humble, and it will not be destroyed." The crowd roared. In that moment, his image, the bearded revolutionary, the defiant survivor, became immortal. Yet, success came with a cost. The failed invasion drove him fully into the arms of the Soviet Union. Within months, Soviet military advisors arrived, and soon after, nuclear missiles were secretly installed on Cuban soil. The year was 1962. The world stood on the edge of annihilation. From then on, Fidel charted a path between two superpowers, too revolutionary for America, too independent for Moscow. He sent doctors and teachers across Latin America and Africa, waged ideological battles through words and diplomacy, and stood as a symbol of resistance to imperialism. Still, the shadow of the Cold War never left Cuba. Embargoes tightened, spies circled, and fear became part of daily life. The revolution had survived, but it had also been transformed. In private moments, Fidel sometimes confessed to his closest allies, "History is written by those who endure." And as the 1960s gave way to the turbulent decades ahead, endurance became both his weapon and his burden.
Chapter 8. The Price of Power. The revolution had survived its storms, outlasted its enemies, and defied the most powerful nations on Earth. But now, as the 1970s dawned, Fidel faced a different kind of battle, not in the mountains or the streets, but within himself and his own creation. Power, once a necessity for change, had become a weight. The dream that began in rebellion now lived in the machinery of a state, rigid, watchful, and demanding. The same man who had once fought for freedom now carried the burden of maintaining control. Fidel rose early each morning, studied reports until dawn, and gave speeches that lasted hours. His energy seemed limitless, but those close to him saw the toll. "He never stops," Che had once said. "He burns like a man who knows the fire will consume him." Cuba was changing. The island's literacy campaigns and medical missions won global admiration. Schools were built where none had existed, and doctors treated the poor across the world. But the cost was isolation. The US embargo tightened. Soviet aid came with strings. Every decision Fidel made seemed to come at a moral price. He often said, "A revolution that is not able to defend itself will not survive." Yet defense came to mean surveillance, censorship, and control. Dissidents were silenced. Artists and writers who questioned the government vanished from public life. Even among his supporters, whispers began. Had the revolution become what it once opposed? Fidel's speeches grew longer, his tone more reflective, even melancholy. He spoke not just as a leader, but as a man haunted by history. "I have seen too much suffering to be naive," he told students in 1975. "We dreamed of perfection, but we are only human." The relationship with the Soviet Union deepened. Trade deals, military cooperation, and ideological alignment. Yet Fidel resisted being anyone's puppet. "Cuba is not for sale," he declared, even as Soviet oil fueled Cuban factories and Soviet ships filled Havana's harbors. Then came Angola, Ethiopia, Nicaragua. Faraway lands where Cuban soldiers fought in the name of international solidarity. To Fidel, it was proof that the revolution could transcend borders. To others, it was obsession, a crusade that drained the island's fragile economy. At home, food shortages grew and the black market thrived. The same people who had once worshipped Fidel now stood in long lines for bread. Still, his charisma held. When he spoke, crowds gathered. He remained to many the father of the nation, stern, flawed, but unbreakable. In private, those close to him said he had become more introspective. At night, he walked the halls of his office alone, the glow of his cigar flickering in the dark. He no longer trusted easily. Betrayal, he believed, could come from anywhere, even from within. And yet, his belief in the revolution never wavered. "History will absolve me," he had once declared in a courtroom long ago. That phrase, now etched into memory, became both shield and prophecy. As the years passed, Fidel's hair turned silver, his speeches slower, his eyes more distant. The fire was still there, but it burned quieter, deeper, inward. Power, he realized, was not victory. It was endurance, a test of how long one could hold the dream before it began to hold you. And so Fidel continued, standing between triumph and tragedy, a man forever balancing on the thin line between savior and prisoner of his own revolution.
Chapter 9. The Aging Revolutionary. By the 1990s, the world Fidel Castro had fought to shape was vanishing before his eyes. The Soviet Union collapsed. The red banners fell across Eastern Europe. And suddenly, Cuba, his Cuba, stood alone. The US embargo tightened again, cutting off food, fuel, and medicine. The economy crumbled. Bicycles replaced cars. Electricity flickered for hours each night. It was called the Special Period, a phrase that tried to soften the hunger and hardship that filled every home. For the first time, Fidel faced not an enemy with guns, but despair itself. "We will resist," he told his people, his voice still steady, though thinner, older. "We will not surrender to misery." He appeared on television more often now, thinner, grayer, but still commanding. In long, unscripted speeches, he urged Cubans to endure, to believe that sacrifice was noble. "If we lose faith," he said, "we lose everything." And somehow, many still did believe. Foreign tourism opened the island to the outside world again. Dollars began to circulate. New hotels rose beside crumbling colonial streets. The contradictions grew sharper. The revolutionary ideals of equality now lived alongside private privilege and quiet resentment. Fidel watched, uneasy. "We must never forget who we are," he warned, "even when the world tempts us to change." Yet change crept in anyway. The world was moving faster than any revolution could follow. His health began to waver. The once tireless commander moved more slowly, his voice rasping with age. But his mind remained sharp, alert, analytical, restless. He read late into the night, surrounded by books and maps. To his aides, he was still El Comandante, a man incapable of giving up control. In 2006, illness finally forced what no enemy ever could, his retreat from power. For the first time in nearly 5 decades, Cuba awoke without Fidel's voice on the radio. His brother Raúl stepped forward to lead, quietly, cautiously. The world waited to see if Cuba would change. But Fidel, now watching from the shadows, still wrote columns, still sent advice, still spoke to the people. "I am not saying goodbye," he wrote, "only preparing for a new battle with time itself." There was something almost poetic in his old age. The warrior turned philosopher, the revolutionary turned storyteller. When visitors came, they found him reflective, even gentle. He spoke of nature, of books, of mortality. "To live is to fight," he said softly once. "But to understand, that is peace." In his final years, Fidel became less a ruler and more a symbol, a ghost of the 20th century walking through the 21st. To some, he was a relic, to others, a legend. And in the stillness of those twilight days, the man who had once moved nations sat beneath the palm trees of Havana, watching the sea he had loved all his life. The waves came and went, endless, patient. He smiled faintly, as if he understood at last. Revolutions fade, leaders fall, but the tide endures. Chapter 10. The Legend and the Lesson. When Fidel Castro died in November 2016, Havana fell silent. The news spread like a whisper through the streets, carried on the wind that rustled the palms along the Malecón. For nearly 60 years, he had been the constant, the voice, the symbol, the shadow. And now he was gone. Crowds filled Revolution Square, holding candles and flags. Some wept openly, others stood in reflective silence. Around the world, reactions were divided, mourning and celebration intertwined. To some, he was the hero who defied empires. To others, the dictator who silenced dissent. But everyone agreed on one thing: history had lost one of its giants. In death, as in life, Fidel remained complex. His image, immortalized in murals and memory, continued to haunt the conscience of the world. The lessons he left behind were neither simple nor pure. He proved that ideas, when driven by conviction, can outlive armies. Yet he also showed how power, even in noble hands, can harden into something unforgiving. His legacy was not just in politics, but in persistence. Cuba, though small, had held its ground against the tides of history. Education and medicine flourished, even when the economy faltered. And while the island bore the scars of control, it also carried the pride of survival. In one of his final reflections, Fidel wrote, "Men die, ideas do not." It was both prophecy and confession, an acknowledgement that his body would vanish, but his vision would linger, reshaped by time and memory. Today, Cuba continues to change. The old banners fade. The new generations dream in different colors. But in every corner of the island, there is still the echo of his voice, urging, warning, believing. Perhaps that is the real lesson of Fidel Castro, that history is not about perfection, but endurance. That every revolution, no matter how bright, casts a shadow. And that greatness often walks a fine line between vision and obsession. As the waves crash against the shores of Havana, the sea remembers. The boy from Birán, the dreamer from the mountains, the leader who refused to bow. Time, as always, will be the final judge. But somewhere, in the rhythm of the Caribbean wind, his story still whispers, reminding us that one man, armed with nothing but belief, can still change the world. History remembers many names: kings, conquerors, and dreamers, but few burn as fiercely or as long as Fidel Castro. Whether seen as hero or tyrant, his flame refused to go out. It lit the hopes of a generation, challenged the world's powers, and left behind a trail of contradictions as deep as the sea that surrounded his island. Even after his death, his presence lingers. In Havana's murals, in the songs of old revolutionaries, in the quiet resilience of a people still carrying the weight of his dream. His story reminds us that history is never simple, that every ideal comes with a cost, and that greatness is often carved from struggle, not comfort. To study Fidel is to look into the mirror of humanity itself, full of brilliance and flaw, compassion and control. He was a man who believed that destiny could be shaped by will alone. And whether he was right or wrong, he proved that conviction, once set aflame, can illuminate even the darkest century. The revolution may fade, but the questions he raised about justice, freedom, and power remain eternal. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of all. If this journey through history moved you, if you found a spark in these echoes of courage, conflict, and endurance, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave a thought below, and share your own reflection on the man, the myth, and the lesson. Because history is not over. It lives on in every story we tell, every voice that dares to remember, and every flame that never fades.